Well, here this morning we're working through a series of sermons, cross-reference, and we want to talk about all the different ways that the Old Testament references what's going to come later with Jesus, reference the cross, that it's going to picture it and think about it ahead of time, that there's warnings all through the Old Testament, and if you're not super familiar with that language, the first two-thirds of your Bible are about the history of Israel and the Jewish nation as it goes from nothing into a full nation. And through all of that, through all their kings and prophets and judges, there's little warnings that God's going to shake it all up one day, that he's going to change everything, and that Jesus is part of that. And those clues and those warnings pop up often. And we're going to talk about one thing today that pops up in Numbers that's kind of a warning a couple thousand years ahead of time about Jesus and what that's going to mean and what that's all about. Have you ever noticed, just a side note here, a lot of the medical stuff in our country, snakes are heavily featured in that. And it's kind of a curious thing. It goes back, we know for sure, to Greek mythology. The one on the left there is the rod of Asclepius, a Greek physician who became, they made him a demigod later on, and he had a staff that was supposed to have a snake on it, and he did a lot of healing with snakes. A lot of snakes in his healing. If you were really sick with something, he'd put a snake on you, and I'd have to be really sick to need to get to have that kind of a treatment. But apparently he did that and was really effective. And the idea that snakes would shed their skin was the idea. Snakes would shed their skin and so be reborn, and that good medicine could do that for you, could rebirth you there. The Army Corps of Doctors, Corps of Medical, Medical Corps, they adopted the symbol on the right, which really has nothing to do with healing at all. That goes back to Hermes, and he had a staff too, and he's the god of thieves and commerce, which there is some medical crossover there more lately, but it's not something that at the beginning it was really what they were thinking of. Now there's some thought maybe that this idea of a snake on a pole, that it may go back further than the Greeks. There's an older story than the Greeks about a snake on a pole and how healing came from that. And while there's not really a conclusive thread that you can point to know for sure, there's a lot of Christians who through the years have wondered if maybe this story we see in Numbers might have influenced this. There's an odd story about a snake on a pole and how it brought healing. And I want to get into that as far as our sermon today as a cross-reference thing. I also wanted to mention, as I get into it, before I get into it even, that this sermon and kind of studying for it and thinking about it, it really affected me. It was one of those things that the more I thought about it and the more I tried to dig deep into what was being said in the Old Testament and then also in the New about this, it really kind of worked on me all week long about what kind of Christian I am and what kind of Christian I'm supposed to be and what my responsibility is in the whole pursuit of this thing. And anyway, it got me thinking a lot. And I don't know, because I had so many thoughts about it that kept coming up, I hope I can convey that, because I really think it's one of those stories that when you read it, especially like if you took a thing on yourself that I'm going to try to read through the Bible in a year, it's one of those stories when you get to it, at first it's kind of curious. And it's kind of hard to understand what God really had in mind there. But then when you think about it, and especially when you see the New Testament reference back to it and how it's applied, it's pretty significant. It's really, really foundational. So anyway, here's the story. If you don't know, it says the Israelites. The they here at the beginning, the very first word, the they, is the Israelites. They've been set free from Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt. Moses was taking them across the desert. They got to the very edge of the promised land and rebelled against God. And so they had to go for 40 years into the wilderness and wander. The idea was they sent spies into the land to see if it was safe or not. Spies were there 40 days. And so now 1 year for each day of those spies, you're going to have to go wander in the wilderness. 40 years. A lot of water goes under the bridge in 40 years. 40 years ago, Reagan was president. Michael J. Fox was the most popular actor in the world. And I was a junior in high school. It was a good time all the way around. And for 40 years, as they're floating through there, they're thinking, okay, like a kid at Christmas, marking off on the calendar. One day we'll get out of this desert. One day we'll get to the promised land. God has promised in 40 years. And so now we're right to 40 years, and it says they traveled from Mount Hor along the route to the Red Sea to go around Edom. And again, if you don't know your maps and stuff, you could read past that sentence and not get much out of it. But they're right at the southern edge going into the promised land, and they ask Edom, the nation there, if they can cut through Edom to get to the promised land. We won't touch anything, and if we buy food, we'll buy food. If we take food, we'll buy it. We won't take anything from you. And Edom says no. And God says, you can't attack Edom. Edom is a relative of you, and you can't attack Edom. You're not allowed to attack Edom. So now they have to go around it. And for 40 years, they've had this idea, we'll get to this place and go in, and now they can't go in. They've got to go around, and now they're getting impatient. Now, I get impatient on the road if someone in front of me is going 5 miles an hour slower than I am. But this is much more serious than that, right? I mean, they've been thinking for 40 years about going in, and now they get there, and they can't go in. They can't get there. And so they start to grumble, as one does. And they spoke against God, and they spoke against Moses. Why have you brought us up out of Egypt to die in this wilderness? There's no bread, there's no water, and we detest this miserable food. And the miserable food they're talking about is the manna that God sent every morning for free. I mean, it was free food that God sent every day, and they're sick of it. We don't even like this anymore. We liked it at first, now we don't like it anymore, and they're just grumbling. I doubt that they really want to go back to Egypt at this point, when they're right there at the promised land, when they've just gotten through their 40 years. But they're mad, and when you get mad, you start grumbling, and when you start grumbling, then that leads others to grumble. Grumbling is infectious. One person starts grumbling on a long ride, pretty soon others in the ride are grumbling, and it just, when do we get there? And now everybody's mad. And so, but this gets out of hand. It says the very first thing, they're speaking against God. And really by complaining about the food, it really is an insult sent to God and to God's direction. And so God, there's a plague. It happens a lot on the trip. They'll complain and grumble, and a plague will happen. And they'll complain and grumble, and a plague will happen. And this time it's venomous snakes. And actually the word there is a fiery serpent. I think King James will say fiery serpent. And the fiery thing is it burns. And it's possible the snake itself was lit up like it was a supernatural snake, but it's more likely that it burns. When they bite you, you immediately have a burning pain, and it doesn't go away. And these snakes, a lot of Israelites are dying. And this causes the people right away to say, oh, we made a mistake here. And they apologize for it. We sinned against, we spoke against the Lord, Moses, and spoke against you. So pray, they say, that God will take these snakes away from us. And so Moses, he prayed for them. And God says, well, make a snake, like a bronze snake. He says in the literal there, make a bronze snake and put it up on a pole. And then anyone who's bitten can look at that snake and they'll live. And so Moses made a bronze snake and he put it on a pole. And then if anybody was bit, then they lived. And I got a picture of it. I mean, it's not, there's a AI guess at what it looked like. Just a bronze snake on a pole. And it's a weird story. On its face, it's a weird story. Because at some level, it looks like an idol. And God has been very clear about not making idols all the way through Scripture. And at one level, it looks like an idol. And in fact, the Israelites do keep it around and worship it later on. We read in the book of 1 Kings or 2 Kings that they finally got rid of this thing because they had kept it for 1,000 years and had prayed to it and stuff. And that was never the idea. I mean, the notion of it is, I want you to look at your judgment. I want you to look at your curse. I want you to look at your sin. And when you look at that snake and you look at that, I want you to think about how you got into this hole. And just by thinking about it, by orienting your life that direction, you'll be saved. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to pray to the snake. You don't have to burn incense or make a sacrifice to the snake. You just got to think about it. You just got to put your head on that for a minute. And if you put your head there, God says, I'll save you. It's interesting, too, he doesn't call off the snakes. They say, God, we need you to, we're so sorry, please take away the snakes. And God doesn't take away the snakes. Instead, he gives them a way to survive the snakes. The snakes are still there. The snakes will still bite. But if you'll look at this pole, you'll live. And it's an odd story. I mean, it is. On the face of it, it's odd. And then when you think about it and kind of dig into it, it's an odd story. And it's not that it's not interesting. Nothing like a snake story to get your attention, but it doesn't make sense in a lot of ways until Jesus references it. Jesus, if you watch The Chosen, there's this powerful scene early in The Chosen where Jesus and Nicodemus have a conversation, and it's like it eats up most of an episode. And in the Bible, it eats up almost all of John chapter 3. And in John chapter 3, Jesus talks to a guy named Nicodemus, and Nicodemus is a teacher, and he's important, and he's really smart, and they have this conversation, and they try to work everything out. And in the middle of that long conversation about who Jesus is and what Jesus is doing, Jesus mentions the snake story. He says, just like this is Jesus talking here. He says, just like Moses lifted up a snake in the wilderness, so the Son of Man must be lifted up. Now, Jesus uses that phrasing three times about him getting lifted up. He'll say in John chapter 8 and then again in John chapter 12 that the Son of Man must be lifted up, that he can draw all people to him. And when he says it, lifted up, he always means the cross. He always means crucifixion. And even though it's early, this is John 3, John is 21 chapters long, even though it's a long time before he's going to be on the cross, he already knows about it. He's already talking about it. Nicodemus, who's hearing it, doesn't know about it yet, but Jesus does. He's already talking about it. He says, one day I'm going to be lifted up on a cross like that snake was in the wilderness, and anyone who believes or looks on me, he says, they're going to have life. And he's referencing that story again. And again, all by itself, the cross story might not make sense to a person. What's Jesus dying have to do with me at all? But it's the same principle. It's the same point. I want you to look at what your sin has bought. I want you to look at your curse. And when we look at the cross and we really think about it, what Jesus did there, he's paying for us. He's bleeding for us. The crown of thorns and the nails and the beating and the mocking, it's for us. He's letting his life ebb away slowly to pay for the sin that I've done. And when I focus that direction, when I look that way, he says, I'll live. He's going to breathe new life into me. And on the one hand, you think, well, that doesn't make any sense. Shouldn't I have to do something? Make a couple of offerings or do something heroic or get my, be really good first? And it's never presented that way. The same way that those Israelites could look at that snake on the pole and live, he says, you can do that now. You can look at me, he says, and live. It's a new concept. It's a new way of thinking about God. It's a new way of thinking about how he operates. But even though it's new, it's been predicted a long time, Jesus says. A couple thousand years ago, when Moses did this, it was all leaning towards this. And then he tosses this verse out, the very next verse, and we sang about it earlier. It says, God so loved the whole world that he gave it up for you. God so loved the whole world that he sacrificed everything for you. That if you believe in him, if you'll just hold on hope to him, if you'll just focus on him, you won't perish, you'll live again. It's probably the most popular verse in the Bible, right? And for a reason, the whole gospel summed up there. All I've got to do is turn my attention back to God. In the same way those poor rascals in the desert, and the snakes are biting, when they focus back on God, when they focus back where he told them to focus, when they thought about the judgment and the curse and their sin, he saved them. And when I do that, I don't look towards a snake on a pole, but I look towards Christ and I look towards the cross and I think about my sin, I think about judgment, and I think about my choices and how I got to be where I'm at right now. And I know that I can't clean myself up. And the snakes are still biting all the time. My sin just continues to knock me down. And if I can slide out of the sermon here just for a second and personally here, it frustrates me at my age how many sins that I deal with today that I have always dealt with. Some of the arguments that Julia and I might get into, the same arguments we've always gotten into. And I'll walk away from it and think, I should be smarter than that now. And yet I'm not. I think about some of the foolish things that I do, and I should be beyond that by now. And certainly there's some victories I've had, where I can look back and say, I'm not the same guy I used to be, but far too often, I'm disappointed in myself. I should be more focused. I should care more. And then I read about all this stuff again. And I started to see God's heart for me. That God just wants me to turn his direction. I think that I got to get myself all cleaned up for God. And certainly there's value in being good. It's good to be good. But that's not what saves me. What saves me is turning my life back to him. One more verse out of John. He says, God didn't send Jesus to condemn us, but to save us. I've never really understood why verse 17 wasn't as popular as verse 16. I think it means just about as much, and in some ways really shows us God's heart. God's not against you. In fact, he's willing to become the curse for us. I've mentioned before, in the 1500s, Michelangelo painted the Sistine Chapel, and this is the most famous part of that. It's called the creation of Adam. But it's not really creation, because Adam's already awake. He's alert. He's conscious. He's not created in this painting. He's already created. This is more the calling of Adam. Like Adam is there, and he's alive, and he's his own entity, right? Just like you are. You're your own person. You've got your own thoughts, your own life, your own dreams, your own passions. You might be sitting with somebody who loves you and you love them, but they can't totally get in your head. It's your kingdom, your island in the world as you're heading around. And God whispers to us and tries to call us back to be tied to him. And in the painting, Michelangelo shows God all flexed, right? Every muscle is and God's reaching as hard as he can towards Adam. The cloth there on the bottom on both sides and the fat babies are supposed to represent speed and power. I think in our day it'd be more probably aerobicized babies. We'd have more muscle, but in that day it represented wealth and power. And God is flying as hard as he can towards Adam. But Adam's not even sure he's interested. He's kind of laying back away from God. And if you focus in on just the hands, God's all stretched out. And Adam's not even sure. All he's got to do is kind of, just a little turn. But he's not doing it. It's like he's holding back. And this was Michelangelo's testimony about us, about people, right? That God calls to us, that God whispers and shouts and tries to get us back to him, but we're not always interested. I feel it all the time. Partly because I've been reading this chapter and thinking about it, but I feel it all the time. You go on a long hike out in the woods or a long drive and you see the trees changing colors and the temperature's a little nicer, or when it's really cold and kind of bites your lungs and you go outside and you look around, you can feel it, that there's an order and a plan and a hum to this world. That there's a, beyond the molecules and the science, there's something living all around us, and you feel it. And it's not Star Wars-ish. It's not a great force. It's God. And I think he whispers to us all the time and tries to call us back. And at some level, I'm always aware of that. When I do goof up, when I do make a mistake, I feel the weight of my sin, and I can't believe I was so stupid, and I need to turn back. Okay, and I'm going to start right now. I'm going to get more serious right now and turn back, and tomorrow, you watch, I'm going to be 100%. And then I'm like Adam. Something in me resists that. God calls and pulls, and there's just something in me that, well, it occurred to me this week, maybe there's something in me that just doesn't think it matters. That God will just take me like I am because that's what God does. And I don't think that's exactly the promise. Again, I think about those Israelites and the snake on the pole, and they're getting bit left and right, and the invitation's open, but they have to turn. It's free. I mean, just one little flick of the finger, just one little turn of the head, and they'll be healed. But they've got to. They still have all the power. God gives us the power in the relationship. You think about a church where there's no passion. You think about a cold church where nobody really cares that much. You know, a lot of times we can reduce our Christianity to what's the minimum I need to do to be saved. You think about a church filled up with people like that, and they just kind of mumble through the words of the worship song, and they just don't. You just try to be as quiet as you can and get out of here and don't really mingle or interact. And why do people do that? Well, at some level, because they just don't think it matters. And the way the Bible presents it is different than that. This is life and death. I mean, when I bring my whole heart here, I can be changed. And not because of some powerful work I did. It's just when I open up to the cross, when I really focus in there, when I really turn my head that direction, when I really say to God, it's all yours. I mean, just the act of turning changes my heart. There's a guy named Charles Spurgeon. There's his picture here behind me. And he was probably the most famous preacher in the 1800s. His preacher in England. Every week he preached to 5,000 people without amplification, without microphones or speakers. 5,000 people would crowd in to hear him. It was the biggest church in the world. And would roll in there to hear him. We still, all his books and commentaries he wrote, people still study them. And not as big a deal maybe to everybody, but a lot of preachers know who the guy is and became kind of well known. But when he was first getting started, he was having a hard time deciding why this even mattered, why the cross mattered, why he knew that Jesus had taught he knew it was taught that Jesus died on a cross to save us from our sins, but he couldn't put together why that mattered, why Jesus dying on a cross mattered. And so for a long time, he decided as a young man he was going to find out. He tried to go to all the different churches, hoping that some church would explain it to him in a way that he hadn't heard before, week after week, and he never could figure out what the cross had to do with his sin. One snowy Sunday, he woke up and intended to go to a church kind of far away, but it was so bad, the weather, he went to a church pretty close. It was really small. It was about 12 to 15 people there. And he sat on the back row, and he waited for the stuff to start, but it didn't start. The preacher didn't show up. It was too snowy. He couldn't get there. And so after a few minutes, one of the guys in the congregation decided to get up, and he'd preach. And Spurgeon later would say the man didn't seem very smart. He didn't know exactly what he wanted to say, but he opened up the Bible, and he turned to Isaiah chapter 45. And I think I have that verse. There it is. Isaiah 45 in King James. And he says, "Look to me and be ye saved, all the ends of the earth. For I am God, and there's no one else." And the guy then told that story in Numbers about the snake, about how God provided a way out in the middle of all their sin, and that all we had to do is look. And then he says, Spurgeon, that the man pointed to me on the back row, 12 to 15 people here. He pointed to me and said, "You, young man, you look very miserable. And you'll be very miserable in life and in death until you obey this verse. He said, look to Jesus. See the blood pour out of his pores and see him as he hangs on the cross. Look to Jesus as he hangs there. And look to Jesus as he rises again. Oh, you poor sinner, look to Jesus and be saved. Now, I'm going to say, probably for me, that wouldn't have been an effective tack. I probably would have went back out in the snow after he started, and I wouldn't have hung in there. But for Spurgeon, he said it completely undid him. He said it was like God saw him there in that building all by himself, and he had this heart. He wanted to serve God. He never could figure out what it was, and it's as easy as look in his direction. It's as easy as turning your life towards him. We think that following God is like a road map. Like you've got to do this, and you've got to turn here, and then you've got to go here, and then you've got to do that, and then you've got to do this other thing. And it's really complicated. And it's more like a compass than a road map. You just face the right direction, and you can be saved. And you continue to face the right direction. And as you face the right direction, it might lead you into all sorts of wild country. You know? And that'll be challenging in weird moments. If we were to grade everybody in here and get in line, somebody in here is the very best amongst us, and somebody in here is the very worst. And I don't know where you're at in that line. We're not going to do that today. But if we did, we'd have a big line of people, and one person's the very best up in front feeling good about themselves, and one person's the very worst in the very back of the line feeling bad about themselves. And then God would notice and see which way you're all facing. And that would make all the difference. And you might see some guys way up in the front of the line who don't smoke or don't drink or don't watch bad shows on television, but they really don't think about God that much at all. You might see some guys in the very back of the line who struggle very hard just to stay straight, but they wake up every morning and they turn back to God. And they ask God again to take their heart. And some of those guys in the back of the line might actually be closer to God than who you'd expect. It's just about orienting your life to him. God so loved the world that he gave his only son, that all you have to do is believe in him. And then you won't perish. You'll have life. Hebrews says we should throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles and run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus. If you can put your head back on that desert story with the snakes. Some people complained, and then the snakes are amongst all of us. Some of the worst complainers, maybe they got bit first. And they died. But we're all getting bit, every one of us. And so Moses stands up and announces, I've asked God to take care of us. And so you say, great, when are the snakes leaving? Well, they're not leaving, Moses says. The snakes are going to be here, sadly. But God has given us a way to get through it. You just need to look up here at this pole, and you'll be fine. I'm sure there were some people who thought, well, that's stupid. There's no way that can help me. I'm a man of science, and I cannot see the parallel quickly of how that would affect me and get me through this thing. And so they didn't do it. And they got bit, and they wouldn't do it. Out of pride, they wouldn't look that direction, and they died. There were other people probably who said, I can't trust it. I'm going to run as far away from here as I can, and get as far away from all of it as I can. And they ran and they ran and they ran, but the snakes were faster. And when the snake bit them, they tried to turn around, but they were so far away they couldn't see it anymore. And they died. But there were some people who thought this seems crazy, but if this is the only way, and they got as close to that post as they could. I mean, if it had been me, I might have had one hand on the post just to make sure that I was close enough to it. And they still got bit because sin bites all of us. And this world has a way of biting us, even when it's not sin. You can have bad things happen to you, and that's just the way the world is. but I don't want to get too far away from this thing that'll heal me. And so some stayed right there, close to the cross as they could. And when they got bit, they just looked to Jesus. And they lived. I know it's a strange way, but it is the way. There's no other. There's just God. And this is what he set up for us. Now, where it hit me specifically, I make a few dumb mistakes, and I got hurt a few weeks ago. Had a bad fall and got hurt, and then I was home together for a week, and Julia had already arranged a vacation with some friends in California. Was going to meet them and go on this vacation. And she said, "No, I'll cancel it if you want me to." She told me that. I said, No, I want you to go. You'll be fine. But then as soon as she left, I was like, man, why did she, what kind of person leaves me here crippled on the couch? And she'd call at night, "Oh, we're having such a great time." "I'm so glad you're having a great time," I'd say. But I wasn't glad. And I would feel bad for myself sitting there and thinking about how rough my lot in life was. And it's just weird what your head will do, and it never would last long, just little moments of feeling sorry for yourself. And then when you feel sorry for yourself, you feel entitled to say no to somebody else, or you feel entitled to kind of be grouchy, or you feel entitled to look the other direction. It's weird how our sin infects us. And then it was time to preach on this, So I started reading about it and studying about it and thinking about it. And this notion that if I would just focus my attention back on him, that my life would change. And I don't want to lie to you and say that every time you pray you'll feel better, or every time you sing out and call to God that you'll feel better, because it doesn't always work like that. But I found that it worked that way for me last week. I found that every time I would turn my attention back to God and focus back on him, that he would take me to the place I need to be. Every time. And I know that it doesn't work that way every time for you, and it won't work that way every time for me, but it did last week. I just really believe that so much of our spiritual life is not about you doing 30 good things. It's just about you looking the right direction. Put your attention on God. Say, "God, wherever you go, that's where I'm going to go." And he'll transform you, whether you're the best person in here or the worst. I really do believe that promise is for every one of us. Let me pray for you.